Hello tanks and tankettes, welcome to a pair of view replays. Today I'm looking at the T28 HTC, the tier 7 reward tank that you get for completing the second round of missions. The first one is of course the Shadowfighter, which is not a terrible machine, but the gun that it has is basically the top 75mm that you can mount on the headset, and given that it effectively has worse matchmaking, even though it's limited matchmaking because it's only ever going to see at minimum tier 5, and it potentially can see tier 6. Of course, Hetzer can see tier 6 as well, but the Hetzer can also be top tier at tier 4, and that's never going to happen with the Stug. But this thing, again, it's a tank destroyer with a not particularly impressive gun, although it's not terrible, but the DPM is not great, the accuracy is not particularly great. The alpha damage at 320, you know, that's alright. The only real outstanding thing about this machine is the fact that it has a whopping 60 degrees of gun traverse. That's better than even any of the British tank destroyers. Oh, hello, little Lux. Yes, no, you can't go that way. Yeah, he then turns around, and that's a bit fatal. It's got 200mm frontal armour in places, and it's a bit like the KV5 in that it has two very obvious weak spots. Now, the KV5's got that big Radio Man turret on the front. This has got those two mini turrets on the side, and while part of the frontal plate is 200mm, those little mini turret things are only 102mm. So that's pretty significant. But if you can keep your enemies at a sufficient distance where they're going to have a harder time hitting those, then okay. It's also got the rarity factor going for it in that you don't see a lot of these on the battlefield, so a lot of people aren't actually going to know where to hurt it. That may or may not, that potentially will change as time goes on, but the fact is, I don't have this, but people I do know that have it, they're not particularly complimentary about it. I mean, it's got better armour for its tier than the T28 and the T28 prototype, because it's the same frontal armour in places but a tier lower, but it's still quite slow, and apart from that amazing gun traverse, it's not particularly, there's nothing especially going for it. And it's not a premium tank, it is a reward tank, so you don't get any extra credits for playing it. As you'll actually see at the end of this battle, that Shadowfighter here, he doesn't have a premium account. And you'll see how much damage he does, and then you'll see his ammo costs and how little credits he walks away with. So yeah, and that's after, I don't think he flies a single run of premium in this one, so yeah. But he's able to use this gun traverse very nicely here. He's trying to keep his frontal armour towards enemy tanks as much as possible, angling as much as possible, which is very easy with this amount of gun traverse. And he's also completely able to exploit the enemy's lack of weak spot knowledge. They just don't really know where to shoot him. And he's even getting bounces on his angled side armour. So he's aware the Churchill's coming out behind him, but a Churchill 3 is not that big of a threat unless he gets access to his side armour and can just sit and put shots into his rear armour, rather. Although the Churchill 3's gun is fully capable of penning those little mini turrets. The fact there's also a Churchill 3 in this matchmaking at all, well, he was rather foolishly platooned up with a Churney, it looks like, and was there somebody else in that platoon? I don't know, it's unimportant. An M4, there we go. So he was taking a risk, because the Churchill's another tank with limited matchmaking. But as it is, the only damaging shot he's taken has been from that Leopard that killed his loader, unfortunately. One penetrating shot for 27 damage killed his loader. Extremely unlucky, but yeah, these things can happen. His team does seem to be winning fairly comfortably even, although you will see when we get to the end screen that had he not been on this team, maybe things wouldn't have been quite so comfortable, but it's just one of those things that you can never tell. Maybe his teammates would have stepped up to fill the void. But as it is, he's approaching 4,000 damage. Now the alpha on this gun, like I've mentioned, it's alright, 320 average. It's a 105mm gun, it has 181 average pen. And it is, in theory, similar to the 200 pen 105mm guns that the T28s can mount, but it has a slightly different designation. It's the 105mm T5, whereas those are the T5E1s, and the ammo type is actually slightly different as well. So, although in theory it's a very similar gun, it has a fairly significant reduction in its AP penetration. But for a tier 7 tank destroyer, 181's not terrible. I mean, you consider there are some tier 7s that have got like 170, 175. You know, it's below average, but it's not that below average. So yeah. So meanwhile, this match is pretty much won. There's a Stuart Emil who's been sat all the way at the back. Although, again, I don't have the Stuart Emil, but from what I know from people who've played it, it's not a particularly good tank destroyer either. It seems to be the low point of the Waffenträger line, so maybe the guy can't be blamed for sitting all the way back there. But there we go, a shot finally pens him, and that's enough to take off nearly half his health, and then he gets a little bit of splash damage to boot. So, yeah. So that hurt all at once, and that's where, when that armor fails you, you've only got so many hit points to go around. So, yeah, even though this is as good as it gets matchmaking-wise, it only takes 1 or 2 pens to seriously ruin your day. And if you get an opponent that knows to shoot those little mini turrets, then you're going to go down fairly hard and fast. So really, that's where the comparison to the KV-5 becomes even more apt, because like the KV-5, you can only rely on your armor to a certain extent, and if you totally rely on your armor, if you're not thinking about what you're doing, then you're probably going to get punished pretty hard. So the results of that match were an ace tanker. He got a Spartan badge, a steel caliber, that's a thing, a high caliber and a steel wall. Wow. He got 42,000 credits, and as you can see, like I mentioned, no premium account, 1,547 base XP, and looking at the team list, he was by far and away the best player on his team. That 1,547 base XP was over double the next highest scoring person, and in terms of actual damage, he had over 4 times the amount of damage as the next best player. So if he hadn't been on that team, who knows how it would have gone. And then, as we can see on the end plate, yes, those ammo costs are rather a lot. It obviously costs 1,000 credits a shell, so you have to be quite careful with those shots. And because it's not the most accurate gun, well, yeah, it's not going to be a particularly good tank for making credits with, because most tank destroyers, you know, even with a regular account, that would have been a pretty decent result. But yeah, it does seem to be a little on the expensive side to run this thing, and that's just one more reason why I guess it's regarded as being quite lackluster. Next up, we join what I'm guessing is meant to be Memphis, although I'm not entirely sure. I'm not down with the hip leet speak like all the youths of today. Yeah, no, I'll shut up. But this is a rather different sort of a match, and actually, in terms of damage, he's going to have a less good result. But it's a more interesting match to watch, because the previous one, Shadow was able to just abuse the heck out of his armor, and most of the shots that hit him didn't pen. He was able to just angle to his heart's content and not really have to worry about being particularly challenged by anything. But this is going to be a rather tougher match, because apart from anything else, it's a tier 8 match, and there are a lot more guns around that can hurt him without even really having to try. Some of the 200mm plate on this tank is pretty good, but the kind of the lower front plate area especially, it's not really at all angled. So something like an IS-3, for instance, or a Ferdinand or a Jagdpanther 2 is really not going to have any trouble going through that, even if they're not aiming for weak spots. So there's always that kind of, like, this is probably not going to be a tank that does particularly well at close quarters combat, just because it has got those prominent weaker areas, because it doesn't turn particularly well, and because it's, you know, it's got T28 in the name, so most people are going to know to drive around it. But you have at least got that turret traverse to try and catch people out. Now, in the previous battle, Shadow also had vision equipment. I don't think Memphis here does have any, although it might have optics. You can't actually tell unless, well, I can try and guess from the spotting circle. The actual view range of this thing, I can just look this up right now, is it's not particularly good, 370, so it's not awful, but you're going to struggle to spot for yourself on a lot of maps. So it's one of these ones, actually, it probably is worth having binoculars on it. But if he has got optics, well, it isn't going to particularly matter in this particular battle, on this particular map, because there's not a lot of scope for sitting and sniping from behind any kind of cover. And as you can see, well, they've been able to push up through the middle, and they're also pushing rather aggressively across the bridge, including a Jagdpanther 2, and that's bad news. If he's got his top gun, that could really hurt. In fact, that could potentially two-shot him. There's also an SU-100 and a T-34-2. T-34-2, depends what gun he's got, he might be a pretty big threat. SU-100, maybe not so much, but even so, that's still 390 average alpha on that damage. That's still nearly half his health with one shot. So he's got to be wary. He can't be gung-ho and just plow in as Shadow was able to plow in the last replay. So the Jagdpanther 2 makes a move, but that is not the top gun, which is quite lucky. And you can see there, Memphis has figured out angling is a good thing in this machine. He actually said in his description, and he wasn't particularly complimentary, he said this was actually the first decent game he'd had in this machine. And yeah, his praise for it was somewhat underwhelming, but it is a good game. And maybe it's just one of those cases where, you know, even a terrible tank can have a good game occasionally. But I'm going to reserve judgment. I'm not going to say this is a really terrible tank. I don't think it is. I think it's probably a mediocre tank. It would be somewhat unlike Wargame to give away a really great machine, just, you know, for free. I mean, obviously you have to play a lot to get it. Yes, that's K28 And he's used his repair kit. No, he hasn't. He's used his med kit, so never mind. I'm talking nonsense. But it would be unusual for them to give away a really good machine. Generally speaking, if it's a particularly decent machine, then you have to pay money for it. So there's an SU-100 behind him, but he's trusting that KV-85 to at least be able to keep an SU-100 off his back. He's also going to try and have a go at shooting stuff down in the middle, although this doesn't have particularly great gun depression, but it's enough. It's something like 4.5 degrees gun depression. So in contrast to the gun traverse, you're going to struggle a bit. Although I think the gun elevation is pretty decent. It's something like 15 degrees, so you're going to be able to point the gun up fairly high as well. But like I said, it's enough. And those were, well, it's the back of a tier 6 heavy, you know, anything could pen that. And also the IS, well, 181 pen is in theory enough to pen the front of that, unless he hits one of the bouncier areas of the turret. Anyway, the Jagdtiger 8.8 plows in, and that Jagdtiger 8.8 is going to turn out to be a very important teammate. He's taken one hit, he can survive another, but this IS is now an easy one-shot for Memphis's gun, so he takes him out. Meanwhile, the KV-85 behind him has unfortunately died, and there's a T-34-2 that looks like it might be closing in on his ass. Now, this is a big mistake on his part here. He traverses around in the wrong direction, and it takes him, what, a third as long as it might have if he traversed the other way. Now, fortunately for him, the T-34-2 is just doing a drive-by. Memphis's first shot missed, but the second one goes in. The KV-2 also gets a hit in, but Memphis is unlikely to one-shot this guy. Now, the KV-2 goes down, and as you can see, our remaining heavies are just about hanging on in the south, although the IS-6 has just died to artillery. But they are about to have a fatal lack of minimap awareness, because although that T-34-2 is clearly coming in behind them, none of them have turned to face him. At least it seems like. The SU-100Y might have. But that distraction is, well, maybe the IS-3 was going to go down anyway. I mean, none of the top tier heavies particularly acquit themselves well in this battle. But to their credit, they held that flank for long enough. And sometimes, even if your allies aren't particularly doing the damage, if they're hanging on for long enough for you to get into a crucial position, then that can make all the difference. Now, the SU-100Y is going down because he's got no armor, doesn't particularly have a high amount of health, and at this point, Memphis is alone, although the Jagdtiger is coming up behind him. He's also switched to his premium ammo because his back is figuratively against the wall. He's facing off against 5 different enemy tanks here. Now, they are all damaged. None of them particularly high health, although he had an opportunity there to take out that one-shot IS-3 and instead prioritised the WZ, and I feel that was another mistake. But not a particularly drastic one, because, as you can see, he managed to get away without losing any more health there. Now, that was both him and the Jagdtiger firing at that T-34-2 at the same time, I think. The Jagdtiger takes out the KV-85, who wasn't particularly dangerous, and that just leaves a Tiger and an IS-3. So, this Jagdtiger was paying attention, and you'll see he's actually rather complimentary. You know, he's congratulating him on doing a good job, because if he'd been alone, you know, he had the sense of mind to back off. He didn't just sit by that rock, behind that bush, because with a machine this unwieldy, it's not as bad as the T28 or the T28 Prot, but it's still not particularly fast, and it's not particularly, it doesn't have a good acceleration. If he just sat there, they could have easily just basically pushed past him, but he had the sense of mind to back up, and they had to basically come to him. They had more ground to cover, and that gave him more time to shoot them, and it also gave his ally more time to shoot them. Meanwhile, the enemy team, well, this has come down to a very close match indeed. The Jagdtiger is pretty badly damaged, but that Stuart Emil is now again a Stuart Emil, an easy one-shot. There's still an enemy artillery to worry about, and there's also a Nashorn. The Nashorn, well, he's probably the one that just went on the cap, because we know he was going north. That was probably him that's gone along the glacier. Artillery, it's anyone's guess. Artillery hasn't been spotted in this one, and Memphis able to use that gun, I almost said elevation there, that gun arc to just, as he was driving around, he had a hunch where the guy had backed off, but not down into the middle, which was fortunate. And there's artillery taking, must have been a blind shot at that point, because it must have dropped off the radar. But able to use that that gun arc to just, he didn't have to turn his vehicle at all. And actually, for a slow tank destroyer, that is, compared to some of the, like the French TDs especially, with their very narrow gun arcs, and the tier 6 has to be the worst of the bunch, that can be really frustrating in a tank destroyer when you have to constantly turn your tank, and that of course means you have to constantly re-aim your vehicle, re-aim your gun rather, and you're not just getting the turret traverse dispersion, you're actually also getting hit with the hull traverse dispersion as well. So it's a kind of a double whammy, and none of those machines have particularly good gun stats to start with, although, as I've mentioned in recent videos, the ARL and the CGC in particular did get some buffs in patch 9.8, but even so, they are not comfortable machines to play. So the Jagdtiger was able to successfully take out the Nashorn, and although the Jagdtiger was fairly low health, if the Nashorn if the Jagdtiger had mucked up his shot, the Nashorn could have had him, but I think the Nashorn was very low health himself, because the Jagdtiger, bear in mind that's an 8.8 centimeter gun, so it's not going to have a particularly high amount of damage, but the Nashorn was apparently an easy one-shot for the Jagdtiger, and Memphis's faith in his random teammate was not misplaced, which is, that's always nice when that happens. You trust a random teammate to actually do something, and they do it. Now the Jagdtiger's final score won't be that great, but his help in winning this battle was still fairly vital. This artillery, meanwhile, looked like he was maybe going to try and cross the bridge, but anyway, he decides, why not give it a go shotgun mode. Memphis was playing it a bit cautious. He wasn't he wasn't trying to go for the kill, and the guy just ploughed right into his HE shell, and that was enough to finish him off. Now, taking a look at the scores, that was another ace tanker and a Radley Walters to go with the high caliber and the top gun. So that was a very nice result. And even though the absolute amount of damage done was less, 4,000 compared to 4,700, with the 8 kills done and the amount of work he had to put into winning that one. I suspect also the fact that he was shooting at some higher tiers, that was enough to actually get him more XP, 1,679. And again, by far the best on his team, although that Jagdtiger did alright, 3rd place on the team. The KV-85, who was so amusingly bitching in the chat, was 2nd place, not with a great amount of damage, but again against higher tiers, so that's enough to get him more. And then we had some of the tier rates didn't do too badly. The IS-3 T32 4th 4th and 5th place. So some of his teammates, you know, they were all right. And then we had some other teammates like the Lurver and the IS-6 that were less than all right. But that can happen in any game. And looking at the enemy team as well, there was actually a reasonable spread of damage. So it kind of explains why it was so close. And he says himself he couldn't have done it without that Yag Tiger. So yeah, it's always refreshing to see a teammate that's paying attention and is actually able to respond and do the things that you need them to do. You know, to recognise the situations, to recognise the areas that need to be covered, to respond to kind of the fluctuating situation on the battlefield. So, the T28 HTC, I'm actually not that far from it. I need to finish off my medium missions and my tank destroy missions, both of which are very close, and then I've got a bunch of the light tank missions to do, which are just a pain in the ass, because they're very, very RNG in terms of grappling with the spotting mechanics of the game and grappling with your own teammates. So, that's going to be fun, but eventually, just through me persisting playing the game, I will have it, and possibly I will play it a bit to see what it's like, but I can't see, like, I'm scarred just by the name alone, T28. You know, I successfully survived the T28 prot, and I'm not looking forward to the regular T28. At least this has got gun traverse, I suppose, and it's a tier lower, so it's got that going for it. But even so, it's a T28 something, and that alone is like, I don't know, I've got a Pavlovian response to it at this point. So, if you enjoyed this pair of HTC replays, you can leave any comments below, you can subscribe to my channel, and as always, stay tuned for more.